I just have to ask, can we have one day, just one day, where someone doesn't say something or do something that is completely unhinged? So tonight, we're going to talk about Clackamas County Commissioner Mark Shull comparing vaccine mandates to the Holocaust on Facebook.
Your speech has hurt us collectively as a community. I felt physically sick.
Meantime, Portland's still trying to figure out where to put a bunch of homeless villages. One new option is the Expo Center. Here's the story.
The Expo Center, they use that for stuff, don't they? We're going to get into that in just a moment. Thanks for being with us. I'm Dan Haggerty. Welcome to the story. We want to hear what you think about all the things that we think about, too. Does that make sense? Just tell me what's on your mind. Email us at thestory@kgw.com. You can find me on Facebook or Instagram. Try to make sense of this show for us if you'd like. You can also use the hashtag HeyDan. Now, I want to start things off by checking in on Portland City Council tonight. I know, always exciting. In fact, it's where we found our quote of the day from Mayor Ted Wheeler.
Just for the record, I'm not a member of the Arlington Club, nor do I use cocaine.
Okay. Hey, it had to be said. Somebody had to say it, Mayor. I'm glad it was you. A little context here. See, the Arlington Club is some fancy schmancy Portland thing. It's kind of like a blue check mark for rich people. And cocaine is, well, what's cocaine? And here's why the mayor is putting himself in the same sentence with those two things. City Council is planning to renew its contract with the Clean and Safe program. That's a third-party group that the city pays to keep the city clean and safe. They're nailing it, by the way. And they have somewhat of a controversial reputation. Some people are saying that they're hiring private security guards who harass people who live on the streets. So at this morning's meeting, a guy who's part of a coalition trying to end Clean and Safe said this.
But is the game of politics, is it really just that, Mayor Wheeler, I have to meet you in the Arlington Club in the executive washroom and give you a briefcase of cocaine to actually have an influence and impact on this contract? Like, where is the incentive for anyone to do right when we reward and expand contracts based on a failure to do their job?
Almost got lost there. And you heard the mayor's response, just in case you were curious. He is not a member of the Arlington Club and also does not do cocaine. So that's in the record now. I'm glad we know. Now, today's meeting did get a little more serious. It got a lot more serious, actually. A 9-year-old girl named Hadar spoke to City Council, asking them to do something about the city's ongoing problem with gun violence. And she told them a story about how she was with her family. They had to hide from a shooting at Portland's Rose City Park this summer. I want to play a bit of what she said for you now.
It was my turn to bat when I saw them pull out guns and start shooting. I took a second look because I couldn't believe what was before my eyes. When I looked back, I saw the same thing, except there were bullets shooting in every which direction. I started to go to get my shoes, but the shoes were closer to the people, so I changed my mind and I just ran barefoot. My dad grabbed my dog's harness and we ran to this metal equipment bin that was 5 feet away. We ducked behind it for less than 2 seconds, and as I was getting up to run farther away, a bullet shot about 4 to 5 feet to my right. I want to feel safe, and I don't want to be suspecting that everyone is bad or a criminal. And I don't want any other gun violence incidents to happen to anyone in Portland or anywhere in the country.
So we know this stuff is happening. We've been reporting about it. Everybody in town's been reporting on it. But it just sounds different when it's coming from a child. Hadar and her family, fortunately, luckily, were able to get away safely, get home safely. They had somebody offer to drive them home from the park. Commissioners acknowledge that her story isn't an isolated incident, as I just mentioned. It just in the last 24 hours, there are several examples. Police responded to 7 shootings in Portland in that time. So as always, the question is, what are they going to do about it? Well, last week, the mayor and the police chief, they had some ideas. They talked about some new strategies, including rehiring retired officers to fill staffing shortages and expanding the street response team to free up police from dealing with mental health calls. Commissioner Mingus Mapps wrote an op-ed in the Oregonian this weekend saying that the city needs to address the gang problem that's fueling these shootings and to stop retaliatory violence within these gangs before that violence can happen. There's also a new project called the Portland Peace Initiative that will involve a series of listening sessions in every neighborhood in the city to try and come up with some solutions to this violence. Okay, let's get to the big story now, which feels like it's like a broken, painful, screechy, scratchy record that just won't stop spinning. A local elected leader who won't stop sharing discriminatory things on his Facebook page. He just won't stop. Can't stop, won't stop. Something tells me that our loyal viewers are going to know who I'm talking about. Since taking office less than a year ago, he's been censured by his fellow board members. He's had a liaison duties stripped away from him. He's facing a recall campaign already. And now for the big reveal, it's Clackamas County Commissioner Mark Shull. You already knew that. No one is surprised. This week, he posted yet another offensive meme on his public Facebook page. Here's Maggie Vespa.
I found this deeply hurtful. I felt nauseous. I felt physically sick.
Another round of condemnation by his colleagues and another round of calls to resign for Clackamas County Commissioner Mark Shull. This time for a meme he posted on Facebook comparing COVID vaccine mandates to the persecution of Jewish people during the Holocaust. It asks, quote, "Anyone see the parallel? We're not going to show you the meme. It's hateful and discriminatory." A rep for the Jewish Federation of Greater Portland called it appalling, offensive, and an affront to the memory of all who perished during the Holocaust.
You have all received an email regarding a post made by Commissioner Shull.
At a meeting Tuesday, Shull's fellow commissioners were horrified.
I have family that are Jewish, I have family that are Muslim, I have family that are Christian, and family that are Greek Orthodox. And anything that relates back to genocide, just brings up a lot of pain.
Commissioner Shull, I want you to be aware that not only for the Jewish community, but for your colleagues and for the residents of Clackamas County, your speech has hurt us.
Shull doubled down.
When civil liberties are restricted and we don't speak up to defend our neighbors who might be affected by those restrictions, then we end up with a slippery slope that could end up in a very bad situation.
The routine all too familiar in Clackamas County.
There's nothing in there that should be construed as coming from a racist perspective.
Back in June, Commissioner Shull also doubled down after referring to vaccine passports as Jim Crow 2.0, a reference to segregation laws banned during the civil rights era. Months before that, constituents dug up a string of Islamophobic and racist posts, again on Shull's Facebook page. He has not responded to our multiple requests for an interview. Commissioner Sonia Fisher did.
That Commissioner Shull should resign. If the voters would have known about his racism and bigotry, I do not believe that they would have elected him.
Calls for Shull to resign echoed by local and state lawmakers, including Representative Rachel Prusak.
My grandfather was a Holocaust survivor. By the end of the war, my grandfather had lost his wife, daughters, brothers, sisters, and he spent most of the war in a death camp.
Prusak noted Shull is not one of her constituents. She, like Fisher, says she's following the progress of a citizen-led campaign to recall him.
Shull has repeatedly used inflammatory and divisive rhetoric that feeds intolerance and hatred. It is unacceptable for an elected leader of his community. And when our leaders use this language, it signals to people in the community that the behavior is acceptable.
So that last interview was all the more poignant because Prusak, you might remember, was targeted with anti-Semitic posters placed around Clackamas County earlier this year. Someone, it seemed, was mad that she was proposing gun safety legislation, and she says police never figured out who did it. But Dan, it's part of why she's speaking out now. And then also it's worth noting the timing of this is making it all the more difficult for people. We're in the midst of a few really important Jewish holidays, including Yom Kippur. That was just last week.
Now, Shaul is already facing a recall effort. So what's the status on that?
So we checked in with them today, and it's worth reminding people they had to legally wait 6 months until after his election before they could officially start their work. So that put them from November into May. But what's happened since May? Well, basically I reached out and I asked them what they're doing, and they said that they're working to start gathering petitions, or gathering signatures, I should say. Once they start that process, they have about 3 months to gather 40,000 signatures. So their staff are basically telling us they're working to make sure they're ready to get that many that quickly, and they hope to start, in their words, soon. They didn't want to say specifically when, but they did say in a statement today that this latest post is, quote, yet another confirmation of why Mark Scholl, in their words, is unfit to lead this county.
All right, we'll keep paying attention to what's going on in Clackamas County.
We will.
Maggie, thank you.
Sure.
We get questions and comments nearly every night from you with suggestions on places for homeless camps and complaints from you about cars and old RVs parked along the road. The city of Portland is working on some solutions, and we're keeping an eye on the progress that they're making. Right now, the city is working on safe rest villages. We've been telling you about this plan for a while. The city would open up sanctioned outdoor homeless villages around town and provide people with a place to sleep and some basic hygiene and access to services to potentially help them get into permanent housing. Last week, Portland City Commissioner Dan Ryan's office says that they're on track to open these by the end of 2021. But where are they going to be? All right, that's a big question throughout this entire discussion. Nothing has been finalized yet, but there are dozens of possibilities, possible places on this list that the city is considering, and they're even open to some of your suggestions. This week, we found out that one of those sites on the list could be the Portland Expo Center. The city is talking with the Metro Regional Government, that's who owns the Expo Center, and using part of it for a homeless village, specifically for people living in their cars or living in RVs. It wasn't on the city's original list, and Metro says right now it's just a discussion, no concrete plans have been made, but if it's approved, people living in their cars or people living in RVs would have access to hygiene and other kinds of help. Now, we've still got some questions about this. You probably do too. For starters, the Expo Center is used for a lot of events, attracting a lot of businesses and tourists to this city. Let's take a look at their calendar, just for instance, right now. This weekend, it's the 20th Annual Northwest Quilting Expo and the Rose City Vintage Market. Next month, the Fall Home and Garden Show and the Portland Bridal and Wedding Expo. Ironically, the annual Fall RV Show in November was canceled. So how would this plan to house homeless people in their RVs at the Expo Center affect your plans to enter your pandemic craft project into the high-stakes world of competitive quilting? We've also have a bunch of questions about competitive quilting too, but that's a different story for another day. Our viewer Kim sent us this comment. I would like to know more where this is proposed and how this will affect future events at the Expo Center. The events bring tourists and money into the city, and they're right. At full strength, so not during a pandemic, the Expo Center brings about $54 million into Portland's economy. Metro says at this point, in their opinion, the events that they have planned won't be affected.
The Expo Center is a big part of a regional economy. A lot of businesses around the region, around the Northwest, rely on it as a place of doing business, a place of reaching customers, and it's a cultural institution in our region as well. We have contracts for the months to come with many businesses that are excited to do business at Expo, and part of the conversation with Commissioner Ryan's office is making sure that we can continue to serve the public with Expo Center's goals and serve the public with the available property that we have.
All right, getting a little look at the property right here. So where on those grounds would this be? Now, the Expo Center is a lot bigger than what you see on your screen. It's about 54 acres, that property, so they have quite a bit of space. Details on where the village could end up at the Expo Center site, they haven't been released yet. We see that there's a big parking lot area there, so one would think. The Metro says right now that this isn't intended to be a permanent plan either. We've heard that before. We'll see what comes of it. And as for the Safe Rest Villages in general, project manager with the city says that they plan to announce 3 sites by the end end of the month, if not sooner, so we'll let you know if that happens. The area in North Portland, where the Expo Center is now, has been long used for temporary housing. You may not know that. During World War II, for instance, the U.S. government housed Japanese Americans in internment camps at that site. And it was also where the city of Vanport once stood, and where thousands of people once lived before their homes were washed away in a flood. Let's take a trip into the KGW vault and take a look at some of the history there. The city of Vanport was built during World War II in North Portland, right where Delta Park is today. At the time, it was the second largest city in Oregon and the largest federal housing project in the country, home to more than 40,000 people. About 40% of the population was black. Most people worked in the Kaiser shipyards for the war effort, but a lot of them left town when the war ended. By 1948, the population had essentially been cut in half, and that is when disaster struck. On Memorial Day, the Columbia River breached the railroad levee, spilling into Vanport and destroying the city. At least 17 people died.
It was the worst weather disaster in the United States in 1948. And so it had national and international news. President Truman came and he said we should rebuild it. However, the city fathers at that time did not want it rebuilt. They wanted Vanport essentially gone and erased, which is part of the reason that so few people know about Vanport today.
But the city left a legacy behind, helping integrate Portland and Oregon, a state that not long before had very few black people due to its black exclusion laws.
These were strangers, 40,000 strangers who created a community. And when that community was disrupted, they brought that community feeling right into Portland and changed it from extremely conservative to what we have now.
The issues of home, displacement, and community that Vanport really helps us dig into are still clearly issues that the whole country and the city of Portland are facing. I mean, the city of Vanport was built because there was not enough housing.
The Vanport Mosaic Festival is held every year in May, complete with a day of remembrance, to talk about the history of Vanport and what our community can continue to learn from it. Well, as with everything else, COVID has delayed the redistricting vote in the legislature. So while we're waiting for that to happen, let's answer some of your questions about how the whole process works, like the fact that they actually can use race to decide where to draw the lines, when the story continues. Welcome back. I always go through your questions and comments during the break. I was just doing that, picking out a few that I was hoping to address at the end of the show. If we have some time, please keep emailing us at thestory@kgw.com or use the hashtag HeyDan on Twitter. And don't forget about our Hey Help campaign. We love this, and so do the organizations that we and you help out and the people that they help. This week, we're asking you to consider donating to Girls Inc. of the Pacific Northwest. They work with schools to help support and empower girls through mentoring programs and after-school groups. If you want to help out, open up the camera on your phone, point it at the QR code on your screen. It'll take you to a donation page. You can also go to kgw.com/heyhelp. It's a micro donation drive. You can just give a little bit of money and it goes a long way. No matter how small, it all helps. Thank you. I want to be honest with you really quickly, as I'm always honest with you on here. But yesterday, just to give you a little look behind the curtain, I had some real concerns about the show. I did. I'll admit that. I asked the team, do you really think people are going to sit and watch 14 straight minutes of stories about redistricting and gerrymandering? I mean, I don't want to be up here talking to myself while you're flipping over to car crash coverage on Channel the Other Guys. They said something, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but it was something along the lines of, Dan, just do what you're told. So that's what I did. And this morning, I woke up and I opened up the ratings anxiously to learn that not only were all of you watching, but our audience grew throughout the show, meaning the people, I don't know, must have been like calling their friends like, dude, are you near TV? Have you heard of Elbridge Gerry? No? Put on the story right now. So, to keep you nerds happy, let's stay on the course. First off, lawmakers have put the redistricting special session on hold until Saturday because someone in the Capitol tested positive for COVID. And according to the Statesman Journal, at least 6 House Republicans asked to be excused because they might have been exposed. The redistricting deadline is Monday, so that means the legislature will only have 3 days to work everything out. Now, back to last night's segment on gerrymandering. Mary Lynn sent me this message and said, I think the professor's explanation, the person we interviewed, of gerrymandering got it backwards. You cannot use race to determine districts, but the Supreme Court said you can use political party demographics. So Mary Lynn, thank you so much for that comment. And I'll admit, my ears also perked up a bit when I heard him say that during the interview. Here's the clip.
You can manipulate the districts, but the Supreme Court has said the only reason you can do that is for racial or ethnic reasons. And so it prevents people, for instance, from making districts where an African-American community, a Black community, for instance, might be split. So there's no chance for a Black person to win to be the representative from that district. So that's the only thing you can take into account. You cannot, explicitly cannot take into account party registration when you make districts.
Okay, so here's the deal. Let me break it down. Our professor, first of all, is correct. This is why we have him on the show. You can use race to draw districts. Let me explain. It's based on Article 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which is one of the most important documents in U.S. history and helps ensure minority communities have a voice in politics. So to kind of unpeel the onion here and give you the details, back in the day, white lawmakers didn't want any black lawmakers, and they knew that black people would be most likely to elect a black candidate. So they would split up those black communities into different districts, and that diluted their voting power. Basically, they created districts where even if every black person in that district voted for the same black candidate, there would still be enough white votes to keep that person from elected office. This spurred many court cases, many court cases, including Thornburg v. Gingles, where the Supreme Court created the Gingles test to help lawmakers to create majority-minority districts, which are very literally districts where the minority population, like the black population, would be the majority in that district. This map shows the racial makeup of the current congressional districts in the U.S. So lawmakers use this Gingle test to see if a minority-majority district is needed. First, they take a look to see if the minority group is even big enough to be a majority in a district. In Oregon, for instance, they're not. Neither the black or Latino population is large enough on a state level. Second, they look at the voting records and see if that minority population is politically cohesive. In other words, can you see proof that they want the same things, but they can't get those things because their vote is being diluted? And lastly, is there evidence that the majority group tend to vote for their own race? Meaning, are the white people only voting for white people? Now, if you were listening closely there, you may be a little confused by something, because didn't our professor also say that you cannot account for party registration when drawing a district? Kind of seems to contradict the Gingles test, where voting history is a key factor. How can it be both? Well, I was told it just is. It's got a little asterisk there. All right, the goal of this ruling, or of the Gingles test, is based on the Voting Rights Act, and it gives a voice to minority groups that have similar values and similar beliefs, and it protects those people from having their values and beliefs from being ignored. All right, keep sending in your questions or comments. If they're about redistricting, I'm happy to nerd up. All right, so is the rest of the team, to be honest with you. Keep sending in the story at kgw.com. I'll read a few when we finish the story next. So Robert Johnson wrote in something today that I want to discuss, and I just think it's an important thing for anybody who watches a program like this one, or any of our programming here on KGW, or any of the local news in town. So Robert was talking about Mark Shaw and how he's in hot water for comparing vaccine mandates to the Holocaust. And he said no comment on Maxine Waters' statement comparing things that are happening at the border right now as being worse than what happened during slavery. So she doesn't represent us. She doesn't represent you. She's in California. Okay, Mark Shaw represents people in Clackamas County. That's a lot of people who live there. So that's why we tell those stories. That's why we hold those people accountable. We are not a national news program. And I think if you've learned anything over the past year and a half, I mean, do you remember how, if you've learned anything over the past year and a half, it's how important our local public leaders are to your everyday life into the decisions that have to be made when life gets real, when there is a pandemic, when people can't get unemployment checks, when people can't get jobs, when we can't keep businesses open, when there are homeless people who can't find housing, when there is an issue with drugs, when there is an issue, all these things. Maxine Waters is not going to do anything for the issues that are happening in Oregon, but the people who we vote into power can and will. So I understand if you have passion for national politics, there are plenty of shows for that, but this show is about your backyard. Keep letting us know what's on your mind. That's the story for tonight. See you back here tomorrow.